He walked into his new job, confident and ready. But when he tried to pass security, the woman on duty blocked him with a cold stare. "No pass, no entry," she said, dismissing him. What happened next shocked everyone in the building. You won't believe who his boss turned out to be. But let's start from the beginning. It was a typical Monday morning in downtown New York, the kind that buzzed with anticipation for the start of another work week. The glass walls of the office building reflected the pale sunlight as Marcus Johnson, a black man in his mid-30s, walked confidently toward the entrance. Dressed in a tailored suit, he felt the weight of both his accomplishments and his ambitions settle onto his shoulders. This was his moment, the start of his new role as senior manager, a position he had worked tirelessly for. As he stepped into the sleek lobby, the low hum of conversations and the clattering of keyboards seemed to fade into the background. His heels clicked against the marble floor with each step as he approached the security desk, where Karen, the office manager, stood behind a glass partition. She was in her late 40s, sharp features framed by dark, meticulous hair. Her eyes, cold and assessing, immediately locked onto Marcus as he approached. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice firm, almost mechanical. "I'm afraid you can't go up without a proper ID badge." Marcus paused. He had been through the orientation, the paperwork, and the welcome email. The badge had been promised to him on his first day. But something in Karen's tone, the way her eyes scanned him with suspicion, made him feel like he wasn't welcome. "I'm the new senior manager," Marcus said, his voice calm but unwavering, the weight of his role hanging in the air. Karen didn't budge. Instead, her expression hardened further. "We don't allow just anyone into the offices without proper credentials." He stood there for a moment, processing the words, the disapproving glance that cut through him like a blade. Was this really happening? He had prepared for this day for months. His qualifications, his reputation, everything had been in place. And yet, here he was, being questioned, treated like an outsider. Could it be? Was it really happening? A cold realization gripped him. Was he being denied access, simply because of his skin color? As Marcus stood there, a sharp wave of frustration surged through him, threatening to break his calm. His pulse quickened, each beat more insistent, but he knew he had to keep his composure. He repeated his name and position, his voice steady, but with an edge of quiet authority. "You can call HR. They'll confirm." Karen, however, was unfazed. She barely looked up as her fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the desk, a sound that felt almost mocking in the silence between them. "I don't need to make any calls," she replied, her tone dismissive, as if she had already decided everything. "No one's getting through without the proper clearance." Her words cut through the air, cold and final, carrying an air of superiority that made the room feel smaller, more oppressive. It was as though she held the power, and he was just an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with before moving on to the real work. The dismissive flick of her wrist, as she waved away his concern, sent a jolt of injustice through Marcus, deepening the knot in his stomach. His mind raced. Was this really about credentials? Or was something more insidious at play? His eyes narrowed, and a sinking feeling began to take hold. This wasn't about a missing ID badge or a bureaucratic mix-up. No, he realized with a clarity that struck like lightning. This was about how he looked, about the color of his skin, a bitter truth that he had encountered many times before, but never quite like this. He had spent years building his career, proving himself, pushing past every obstacle with determination. But here, now, standing before this woman, he could feel the weight of something deeper than just bureaucracy, something more personal. This time, though, he wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Minutes dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. Marcus could feel the weight of the stares from the people in the lobby, their eyes flicking between him and Karen. A silent crowd gathered around the scene unfolding before them. The usual hum of office chatter seemed to fade into the background, replaced by an almost palpable tension. Whispers started to snake through the room, murmurs of curiosity, of confusion, and maybe even judgment. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was becoming something far more unsettling, something that felt like a spectacle. But Marcus stood tall, his posture rigid, his jaw set. He refused to let the moment overpower him. Then, as if on cue, a voice sliced through the tension, cutting it like a blade through thick air. "Is there a problem here?" A man in his early 40s, with a well-tailored suit and a warm, almost reassuring smile, approached the desk. He exuded authority, but there was something undeniably approachable about him. Marcus could immediately tell who he was: the CEO, his new boss. Karen looked up, startled by the interruption. She hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the presence of the CEO. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice still edged with coldness. "This man claims to be the new senior manager, but he doesn't have clearance." Her words hung in the air, but the CEO's reaction was swift. His face froze for just a moment, and Marcus saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. But it was fleeting. The CEO quickly masked his shock with a neutral expression, the kind of professionalism that Marcus had come to expect from those at the top. "Karen," the CEO's voice was sharp now, no trace of warmth left. "This is Marcus Johnson. He is your new boss." The room fell into an eerie silence. The weight of the words hit everyone at once, leaving no room for doubt. The tension that had been building suddenly seemed to dissipate, only to be replaced by something far more intense. Karen's face flushed with sudden embarrassment. The color drained from her cheeks as the CEO's words lingered in the air, heavy with an undeniable truth. She had been so certain of her assumptions, so entrenched in her belief that she held power over the situation, that she hadn't stopped to consider who Marcus might actually be. In that moment, her own prejudice was exposed, raw and unprotected. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice faltering, barely a whisper. The words, thick with shame, barely managed to leave her lips. Marcus felt the tight knot of tension that had gripped him loosen, but in its place, something else stirred, a deep frustration. Why had it taken a public moment of confrontation for someone like Karen to see him for who he truly was? Why did it take such an extreme measure to strip away her assumptions and expose the bias that lay beneath? The CEO turned toward Marcus, his expression shifting to one of genuine remorse. "I'm truly sorry for this, Marcus. You don't deserve this kind of treatment," he said, his voice sincere. Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. He didn't need any more words, and his silence spoke volumes. There was no anger in him, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. He didn't need her apology, didn't need anyone else to make it right. What mattered now was that he had walked into this moment and come out stronger for it. As he moved past Karen, heading toward the elevator, a quiet sense of satisfaction rose within him. It wasn't a triumphant moment, but it was a victory nonetheless. A victory not just for him, but for anyone who had ever faced the same kind of judgment. The atmosphere in the building shifted subtly that day, like a faint tremor beneath the surface. Marcus had not only gained the position he'd worked tirelessly for, but he had also forced a reckoning with the deeply ingrained prejudices that still lingered, unspoken, in too many places.